You finish your to-do list. The inbox is clear. People smile at your success. But something inside you whispers, why does this still feel hollow? It's not sadness, not even burnout. It's the quiet ache that the story you're living was written by someone else. You scroll, you achieve, you please. But deep down, a question echoes. If the noise stopped, would you still know who you are? Most people numb that question. They run from it. Nietzsche didn't. He walked straight into the silence and said, here is where your real life begins. He saw what we're afraid to admit. The rule book is gone. Traditions have crumbled. But this is not a crisis. It's a canvas. The question is no longer, what should I believe? It's, what will I build? This is not about theory. It's about crafting a belief system strong enough to carry you through fear, failure, and uncertainty. This is personal development through the lens of philosophy and psychology. So here's the central question of our journey. If you can no longer borrow meaning, can you create your own? And what would your life become if you did? You are not lost. You are unauthored. It's time to write. Stay with me. Your blueprint begins now. Imagine a crowded street, suits brushing past, notifications pinging. Everyone seems to know where they're going. But beneath the surface, a silent question pulses. What if none of this truly matters? Nietzsche didn't look away. He stared right into that void and invited us to do the same. He declared that the pillars we leaned on for centuries, religion, tradition, science, can no longer tell you who you are. These systems once held the weight of meaning, but now they're crumbling. And when the old gods fall silent, you face a terrifying freedom. No script, no structure, no guarantee. Most people run back to the herd. Back to comfort, back to borrowed identity. But Nietzsche offered a radical path. Don't collapse. Create. If the world no longer hands you meaning, it puts the pen in your hand. You become the architect. Think of your identity like a house. If someone else built it, you might live inside, but you won't know how to repair it when the storm comes. If you build it brick by brick, it bears your fingerprint. You know every part. And that kind of knowing makes you powerful. Here's the brutal truth. Meaning didn't disappear. It moved into your hands. And the only real question left is, what will you build? Stay with me. Next, you'll meet 4 different creators. Each of them faced the void, and each of them chose to write their own code. We've shattered the illusion. Nietzsche revealed that the old systems are gone. What remains is the space to create. But how does this idea play out in the real world? What does it look like to live by your own belief system? Because the will to power is not just a quote. It's a force, a creative fire. And you've seen it before, in stories that moved you, in lives that shook history. Over the next 4 chapters, you'll meet 4 reflections of this force. A teenage girl whose conviction changed a nation. A modern visionary who dared to redefine the future. A fictional genius who turned crisis into rebirth. And the science that proves Nietzsche was right all along. Each chapter reveals a path, a lever, a truth about how power grows when meaning comes from within. Let's begin. She had no army, no wealth, no title, just a voice, and the unshakable belief that it meant something. Imagine this. You're a teenage girl in 15th century France. No formal education, no noble blood. Your world tells you to stay small, stay silent, survive. But then, a voice calls you. Not metaphorically, literally, and you believe it. Not only do you believe it, you act on it. Joan of Arc didn't wait for validation. She walked into royal courts, claimed she was chosen to lead France, and demanded to be heard. She wasn't just bold. She was dangerous because her certainty exposed the fear of those who lived by borrowed truths. At first they laughed, dismissed her as mad, mocked her as naive. But conviction, real conviction, is a flame that spreads. One by one, hardened warriors, men who had seen death and despair, began to follow her. Not because she wielded a sword, but because she wielded certainty. She didn't fight with armor. She fought with fire. Conviction is louder than logic, and more contagious than doubt. Nietzsche would call this the will to power. Not the thirst to dominate, but the courage to shape the world through an inner truth. Psychologists today call it emotional contagion, the invisible transmission of mindset. When someone burns with belief, it alters the temperature of every room they enter. Joan's fire turned the tide of war, not because she knew the future, but because she believed she had a place in shaping it. And here's what people miss. She wasn't certain because she had evidence. She was certain because she chose to be. We think we need credentials, proof, support. But Joan had none of that. And still, she moved a nation. It wasn't magic. It was authorship. She chose her narrative before the world accepted it. Most people aren't paralyzed by what they lack. They're paralyzed by their refusal to own their voice. They don't act because they're waiting for clarity. But clarity often comes after the leap, not before. And so they wait. For certainty, for permission, for someone to say, "You're allowed." But no one's coming, and conviction? It doesn't wait. It walks. Now ask yourself, if you acted as if your conviction were real, even just for 24 hours, what would change? What conversation would you stop avoiding? What project would you begin? What mask would you finally drop? Your voice may not sound like Joan's, but it's no less sacred. And when you speak from belief, not bravado, you don't just change your path, you change the temperature of everyone around you. So again, if your fire were real, who might catch it? What drives a man to risk everything? Reputation, fortune, legacy, for ideas most people laugh at. Most people would stop after one success. Elon Musk didn't. He could have retired comfortably after selling PayPal. Instead, he bet his fortune, again and again, on rockets, electric cars, brain interfaces, things that sounded like science fiction or madness. But here's the question that matters. Why? Because those weren't business decisions. They were belief decisions. He wasn't following a trend. He was following a vision. One he wrote for himself. That humanity belongs among the stars. That sustainable energy isn't optional. That consciousness must expand. A borrowed vision will always tremble in the face of failure. A self-authored one stands, even in flames. And Musk has stood in many. Tesla nearly collapsed. SpaceX exploded on live streams. Neuralink raised eyebrows in lawsuits. But he didn't fold. Not because he's fearless, but because his vision didn't depend on being accepted. Nietzsche would call this the will to power. Not in the sense of dominance, but in shaping the world to reflect your internal why. Philosophy becomes practical when it guides persistence. Psychology agrees. According to self-determination theory, people thrive when they experience autonomy, freedom to choose their path, competence, the sense that effort leads to impact, relatedness, connection to something beyond the self. Musk checks all three. He doesn't build to impress others. He builds because he must. And that's what makes his energy nearly impossible to match. People say, he can do it because he's a genius, or because he's rich. But that's backward. There are millions of rich, brilliant people who do nothing bold. What sets Musk apart is not his brain. It's his authorship. He doesn't live inside someone else's idea of success. He lives inside a story he wrote, one that's so deeply embedded, it fuels him when reason would say, stop. If you don't write your vision, you'll end up building someone else's, their dream, their metrics, their ceiling. And even if you succeed, it will feel like a costume. Now pause. Let's bring this closer to home. Maybe you're not building rockets. Maybe you're just trying to change your career, or speak up in a relationship, or start that side project no one gets but you. Ask yourself this. What's one belief about the future that burns in you, but you've never said out loud? What vision keeps tapping your shoulder when the world goes quiet? And more importantly, what would you do differently this week if you stopped waiting for permission? You don't need billions to start. You just need to choose a story that's yours. Then take the next step as if it were already real. Because vision is not something you wait to receive. It's something you build into existence, brick by uncertain brick. He had everything: fame, genius, wealth, charisma. But underneath the spectacle, he had no core. Tony Stark was the embodiment of modern success. Fast cars, sharp suits, applause in every room. He lived for the show, for the next thrill, for the next escape. Until one day the show stopped. An ambush, a cave, a body pierced by shrapnel, alone, bleeding and powerless. He finally faced the question he had buried in applause. What have I actually built? Crisis doesn't create identity. It strips away what was never real. In that silence, he didn't die. He designed. The first Iron Man suit wasn't just an escape tool. It was a resurrection. A prototype of a new self. Forged not by ego, but necessity. And that shift wasn't cinematic. It was psychological. Because the moment he put on that armor, he wasn't escaping danger. He was choosing responsibility. From that point on, Tony Stark wasn't just a man of inventions. He was a man of intention. Nietzsche would call this the will to power in its rawest form, turning chaos into creation, refusing to let pain define you and instead using it as blueprint for rebirth. And psychology calls this post-traumatic growth. Contrary to what we think, pain doesn't always break us. When we engage with it, reflect on it, and act from it, it can actually reconstruct us. But here's the catch. Growth is not guaranteed by crisis. It is activated by choice. We often pray that nothing will disrupt our lives. But sometimes disruption is mercy. Sometimes collapse is the only way to hear what comfort kept hidden. Because the truth is, many of us live inside identities we didn't choose. Until life shakes the illusion loose, you will face a storm. Maybe not today, but it's coming. The question is, will it destroy your mask or reveal your foundation? And don't be fooled. Reinvention doesn't always look like tech suits and sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like finally saying no, or picking up the journal, or forgiving yourself after years of silence. Now ask yourself, when was the last time pain knocked at your door, and instead of listening, you ran? What would it mean to stop avoiding crisis and start alchemizing it? Your next breakdown doesn't have to define you. It can refine you, but only if you choose to build from it. So here's a challenge. Tonight, write down one identity you've outgrown, one label you've carried too long, then name the value you want to replace it with. And tomorrow, act as if that value were already true. One small behavior, one courageous shift. Because the real armor isn't steel, it's the story you choose to live. What if your struggle isn't because life is hard, but because the story you're living isn't truly yours? We've seen what conviction can spark, what vision can build, what crisis can transform. But does modern science support Nietzsche's call to create your own belief system? Absolutely. In fact, it goes even further. Let's start with Maslow. At the top of his hierarchy of needs sits self-actualization, the drive to become who you truly are, not what society expects, not what your parents hoped, who you are. Nietzsche said it more succinctly. Become who you are. Different words, same truth. Human beings thrive when they live by a meaning they author themselves. But we can go deeper. Self-determination theory, one of the most studied models in modern psychology, reveals that we flourish when three needs are met. Autonomy, you choose your path. Competence, you believe your actions matter. Relatedness, you feel connected to something bigger than yourself. Strip away any of these, and your inner world begins to collapse quietly, then all at once. That sense of numbness you sometimes feel, the restlessness after achieving goals that should make you happy, that's not failure. That's a signal. You're succeeding in someone else's story. The wrong script will never feel right, no matter how well you perform it. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Neuroscience shows that when you pursue intrinsic goals, those rooted in personal meaning, your brain releases more dopamine during the effort, not just at the finish line. In other words, when you live your truth, the journey itself becomes energizing. In contrast, chasing extrinsic goals, status, validation, comparison, leads to shallow spikes of reward, followed by burnout. Why? Because your brain knows when you're pretending, and it punishes you for abandoning your inner voice. Here's the twist. We are conditioned to seek security by copying success, but security without authenticity is psychological erosion. And here's the brutal truth. If you don't choose your meaning, the world will assign one to you. It might be comfortable. It might even be praised, but it will never satisfy, because it was never yours to begin with. Now ask yourself, what belief are you currently living by, just because it's familiar? Which part of your life feels successful, but secretly empty? And what small rebellion could you start today to reclaim authorship? Maybe it's rewriting your goals. Maybe it's pausing before another yes that you don't mean. Maybe it's finally saying, I don't want this, not because I'm afraid, but because it's not true for me. This is not about being reckless, it's about being real. Because when your goals are truly yours, effort doesn't feel like sacrifice, it feels like alignment. And aligned action? That's not just productivity, that's power. Every journey reaches a threshold, the moment when thinking isn't enough, when reading more, planning more, analyzing more won't save you. This is that moment. Nietzsche didn't write for comfort. He wrote to awaken. And he knew the truth we avoid. At some point, your survival depends on meaning. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Without a self-created why, even comfort feels like a cage. With it, even chaos becomes fuel. Look again at the pattern. Joan of Arc, pure conviction, forged in silence. Elon Musk, relentless vision, carved from doubt. Tony Stark, rebirth through crisis, armor made from pain, and science, confirming that meaning is not luxury. It's oxygen. This isn't motivation. This is necessity. Because the world will strip away your maps. It will question your worth. And if you haven't authored your own meaning, you'll collapse into borrowed stories, ones that never fit you. The silence you fear? It isn't empty. It's pregnant, with potential. That's not a void. It's a studio, a sanctuary, a beginning. If you don't claim authorship, you become a character in someone else's script, and that script will never be written for your freedom, only your function. So what does transformation look like? It's not shouting affirmations. It's one act, one moment, one decision that says, this is who I am now. This is your turning point. Within the next 24 hours, take one visible step that proves your why. Not because you're ready, but because you're choosing to be. Write it in the comments. One sentence, one action. Let this community witness it. Don't wait for alignment to arrive. Create it by moving. Remember where we began. That hollow ache in the middle of noise. The whisper beneath your checklist. The stillness that once felt like a threat. But now, that silence has a new shape. It is no longer emptiness. It is potential. It is no longer the absence of meaning. It is the space where meaning begins. You used to fear that you had no script, but what if that's your greatest gift? Because today you hold the pen. You've seen what conviction can ignite, what vision can build, what crisis can awaken, and what science already knows. Your life begins when you author it. So here's the moment that matters. This silence, this pause before the next step, it isn't confusion. It's the beginning of your voice. And now, just one question remains. If today is page 1 of your book, what story will you begin to write? If something in this journey lit a quiet fire in you, leave one word below. Author. It's not just a comment, it's a signal, a way of saying, I am done borrowing, I'm ready to begin. And if you know someone standing on the edge of their own silence, share this with them. Not as advice, but as a mirror. Sometimes we don't need more answers, just the right reflection. Stay close to this space. Here, we don't chase motivation, we craft meaning. Together, we write, one sentence at a time. And maybe, this was your first.